Rhett and Link of Good Mythical Morning have come out with a novel, and as a fan of their content and of novels, I was eager to check this thing out. They held a special book tour type deal called the Bleak Creek Conversations, and I went to the LA one, which is where I got this book. Now, while I am a fan of these guys, I am also a legit critic, and I'll be sharing my genuine opinions on the Lost Causes of Bleak Creek. I will be refraining from spoilers, so if you haven't read it yet, no worries, you are safe here. Their debut novel coming out at this time was especially intriguing to me since I'm preparing to release my own debut novel in a couple of months. I'll be talking more about that on this channel in the coming weeks, so stick around if you're interested in that at all. It's no secret that the main characters in the Lost Causes of Bleak Creek are based on Rhett and Link themselves. If the character names of Rex and Leaf didn't make that clear enough, they've talked about that matter at length already. The book pulls a lot from their childhood, and this ends up being one of the novel's greatest strengths. The novel is full of specificity and little idiosyncrasies that add flavor to both the characters and the setting. The sense of place is incredibly strong, and that's always one of the most important elements of a book to me, that sense of place, that setting. One question I asked myself near the beginning of my read was, is the character writing for Rex and Leaf substantial enough for someone who's never heard of Rhett and Link before picking up the book? And the answer that I arrived at was, yes, I think so. The characters aren't a one-to-one facsimile of our favorite entertainers, and regardless, they are scripted with enough nuance and depth that complete newcomers will still be able to get a good feel for who these guys are, and for what their friendship dynamic is like. I do think it's possible that a stranger picking up this book on a whim might be less inclined to find the Leaf character as likable without knowing anything of the real-life counterpart. Both Rex and Leaf are made the butt of a number of jokes throughout these pages, but Leaf in particular takes the brunt of the self-deprecation. He's presented as petty and difficult to perhaps an overbearing degree that I could see him losing some charm in the eyes of a stranger. But it more or less adds to his charm if you're familiar with the actual Link as portrayed on Good Mythical Morning. It's one of a few areas where your personal bias will likely determine how you view it. On a lead character level, overall, I think anyone could get on board with them and find them suitable protagonists. But I do think that Mythical Beast members will get an extra kick out of the book for sure. There are tons of in-jokes and little things geared toward their fan base scattered throughout. The other characters are well defined as well, especially Janine, who makes for a great third protagonist. Mark Hornhead is a fun comedic side character, and the Ben character serves his purpose well, but could have done with a bit more nuance and depth given his prominence. The novel doesn't delve deeply enough into this character in particular, but he remains functional and there are some great moments with him. His long-form gag involving cheerwine is one of the highlights of the book in my eyes. The Alicia character had me worried partway through, as at a certain point it seemed like they were afraid to present her as anything other than this absolutely perfect, ideal, aspirational figure with no flaws whatsoever. It's a bit of a Mary Sue kind of character is what it feels like. If a character's too perfect and blanketly the right person all the time, then they can stop feeling like an actual character and begin to feel more like the author's either playing it safe or devising a way to personify an ideal rather than attempting to portray a genuine human. And I think to some degree that is what's happening with Alicia. She's one character who had no real-life inspiration behind her, and they have referred to her as an aspirational character, so the cause might be pretty clear. At any rate, the character does certainly leave an impression. She definitely has a personality, and once the Whitewood School comes into play, she does begin to feel a bit more like a real person. The way that other characters react to and play off of her does a good job of grounding her and making her impact known. Leading up to the book's release, the tone was one of the things that I was most curious about. Rhett and Link were describing it as darker than anything they'd previously done. It was going to be more serious, more violent, and I was greatly curious as to just how dark this book would get. After reading it, I can say it is certainly darker, bleaker, if you will, than a lot of their uber-cheery, family-friendly work, but it does also stick pretty far away from any overtly adult subject matter. There is some violence, but nothing graphic or even all that severe on a conceptual level. I'm unsure of my answer to the question, does it feel like it's pulling its punches? Maybe a little bit, given their target audience being as young as they are, but it's not really in a way that detracts from the narrative. You could say that this book isn't as appropriate for all ages as their web content often is, but I think it's still plenty appropriate for most ages. If you're a parent wondering whether or not this is a suitable read for your kid, I'd say it's probably a perfectly fine read for middle schoolers and up. I mean, I read way darker stuff all the way back in elementary school, but if we're being, somewhat conservative about it, Lost Causes of Bleak Creek would not be out of place in the young adult section. It would fit in there just fine. One thing that I can't really agree with is the book's classification as a horror novel. Rhett and Link have referred to it as horror a number of times. It was even included in Goodreads' Best Horror of 2019 collection, but to me, Bleak Creek is a thriller with a good dose of humor. I didn't really find any horror elements throughout my reading. The book has some good reveals and surprising moments and pockets of strong tension, but it's never scary, creepy, or even unnerving. It didn't really feel like horror was something it was going for until I read what Rhett and Link described it as and saw where it was included. Maybe for readers of a much younger age, they would find certain elements scary, but to me, horror really just didn't feel like it was a goal in this novel. I didn't really register any attempt at horror at any point, aside from maybe a quick backstory sequence in the latter half of the book. I'm a massive horror fan, and I was definitely a little bit let down to see that promise of horror go so unfulfilled. Now, there is one significant chunk of the narrative that didn't fully work for me. I won't go into specifics since I'm avoiding spoilers and it revolves around the biggest reveal in the book, so I'm going to keep it vague enough to avoid spoilers. I take no issue with Wayne Whitewood's motivation or his backstory, but the specifics of his goal, the means to which he's meant to achieve that goal, seemed a little half-baked to me. Supernatural elements in stories are always at their strongest when there are clearly defined in-universe rules while also managing to stay mysterious. And the rules to this particular story's supernatural elements seemed a little bit slapdash, like they just weren't fully worked out how things worked. It doesn't need to be spelled out to the reader, but I got the impression that the authors didn't know how the supernatural stuff worked either, and I think that's an important distinction. The highly specific numbers and time frame that get thrown out seemed completely random. It had me asking, well, why? A number of times, in a way that did not satisfy the intrigue that had been successfully generated. There certainly could have been stronger connections between these elements at play in the book. And this issue took away from some of the third act developments for me, but it didn't lessen the characters' actions, and it didn't hurt anyone's arcs or the big climax at all. One area that fully succeeds is the comedy. Knowing how funny Rhett and Link are, I definitely expected some humor in the book, to be sure, but on the talk of its seriousness sort of downplayed the comedic element of the book in the lead up to its release. The amount of jokes in Bleak Creek surpassed my expectation, and the humor ended up being the strongest aspect of the novel to me. It's genuinely funny throughout, and it had me laughing out loud. There are some running jokes included across the narrative, and one in particular regarding the term scooter leg is absolute gold and got me laughing every single time it reoccurred. The Lost Causes of Bleak Creek is a good debut novel, and I would definitely read more from Rhett and Link. Just don't expect the characters to sit down at a desk and shoot an episode of Will It Novel. Thanks for watching my review. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stuff, but don't you dare touch that notification bell. That is my bell. Keep your grubby little hands off of it. Check the links in the description and on the screen here for more of my book reviews, video essays, and other original content. I'll see you in the next video. And guess what? This is just what my voice sounds like all the time. You can get over it or you can go away. Either one is perfectly fine with me.